Hi, everybody. I don't know if you're familiar with my work. I write the Recipes for Health column as well on NewYorkTimes.com. And I have been writing vegetarian cooking cookbooks for a long time, but I've always felt that there is attention hasn't really been paid enough to the vegetarian main dish. And so with this book, I've created kind of a language for the vegetarian main dish by breaking them down into categories and creating templates for each type, such as a frittata, which we're going to do today, or a big bowl, which I'm also going to show you today. And I really try to empower people to cook by making it easy for them, but also delicious. And the way that you can do this for yourselves is to just become really fluent in making a number of foundation vegetable dishes that then you can use in different types of templates, like a frittata, a big bowl, a risotto. So today, and I'm going to be rushing through this because we have like 50 minutes to do this, I've chosen two building block dishes, as I call them. That's the first chapter of the book. One is just very simple wilted greens that are then seasoned with garlic, thyme, and rosemary. And I'm going to use those in a frittata. And the other is a mushroom ragout that it's like a stew with both regular fresh button mushrooms and wild mushrooms, but you could do it all with just creminis or white mushrooms if you couldn't find wild mushrooms. And that I'm going to use to build a big bowl with grains and the mushrooms and other ingredients, some greens that you put on top of it. The big bowls are great because if you are vegan, you can make them completely vegan. You can not add cheese. You can add tofu if you want to add a protein or not. Obviously, the frittata is not vegan. So let me just start with the basic building block of seasoned wilted greens. I'm using, in the frittata, I'm using Swiss chard. You would bring a pot of water to a boil, or you could steam them. I find it's faster and more efficient to blanch them, and it's such a short cooking time, you're not going to lose that much in the way of nutrients. So you would just strip them from the stems. These stems actually are really good in other dishes, so don't throw them away. Yeah?
Could you conceivably put them like 15 seconds in the microwave?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm sure you could, but I've never done it. But I wouldn't see why you couldn't, in a little water, wilt them in the microwave or steam them. You want to wash greens really well twice, and I tell you how to do that in the book. You could also use mustard greens. These are mustard greens. We've already blanched them, and then you would put them in the boiling water, salted boiling water, take them out as soon as they're wilted, cool them in cold water, then drain them, and then it's really important to squeeze out the water. So you just take up handfuls of the grain to squeeze out the water. Otherwise, when you make your frittata, it's going to get watery with the water left in the vegetables. And then we want to season those greens just with a little garlic and olive oil and thyme and rosemary. So garlic cooks really fast. Like I always say, when you can smell it smelling good, that's the time to add your other ingredients. That's like 30 seconds. Otherwise, it will burn, which it actually just did. I'm just getting used to this induction burner. But all you're doing here is infusing your greens with the olive oil and the garlic. You want to season them. And then you would take it off the heat. And then you've got a base recipe that you can use in a frittata, in a quiche, in a risotto, in a big bowl, in a taco. There's just so many ways you can use those greens. When you get greens in the market, when you get them home, go ahead and just blanch them right away and put them in the refrigerator, and then they'll be ready, because that's the most time-consuming part, cleaning your greens and of many recipes. Now I'm going to talk to you about the big bowl and the mushroom ragout before I actually demo it, so that we can get going serving you little tastes of everything. This is the mushroom ragout. Now all of the ingredients over there become this. And I've used this not only to fill that frittata, but we're also going to do the big bowl. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. If you would just, you can take this, but leave me a little bit so that, what? You know, so that I can do it. But I'm going to get going with the frittata now. So my filling is ready. It's the greens. I'm going to beat 8 eggs. And in the frittata chapter, you have a choice. If there are just 2 of you, you can do a 4-egg. Or you can do an 8-egg because they really transport well and eat it all week for lunch and whatnot. And to that, I'm just going to add a couple of tablespoons of milk and about a half a teaspoon of salt and some pepper. I'm going to turn this up just a little. And then I'll just fold in my greens. You want the pan to be hot when you add the eggs to it. So I've got about a tablespoon of olive oil here. And just drizzle in a little bit of egg to make sure it's going to start cooking right away. And as you can see, it does. And then just pour in your eggs. And then for the first couple of minutes of cooking, you're just going to lift the edges of the frittata so that the egg can go underneath. Because what you're doing is you're forming several layers of cooked egg right at the outset. And then once that is done, and shake it a little bit just to get a nice kind of fluffy, get a little air into it. Once you've got those layers established there, then I'm going to cover it and I'm going to turn it way, way down if I can. Oops. Let's see. We're hoping this is going low. And on a home stove, you'd put it on your lowest heat. I'm not sure how low I can get it here. Here we go. And let that go for like 10 minutes. And just every once in a while, I always set my timer for 10 minutes, and I just kind of every few minutes have a look and maybe lift it up, pour some of that under. And then meanwhile, if I had a stove here, I would light my broiler, because at the end, you're still going to have a puddle of egg on the top, and then you want to finish it under the broiler. We're going to do it with a torch, hopefully, today. So let me have some grains, and I'll do a big bowl. We're kind of working in reverse. I'm going to show you how to start this this mushroom ragout, but meanwhile, I just want to talk to you about big bowls. Here, why don't I just take this for now? So, big bowls are really fun because you can mix and match grains, you can mix and match toppings. I've actually got a whole series of big bowls coming up on Craftsy. I don't know if you're aware of that site, and that's coming up in June. This one, we have a choice of either quinoa or farro, which are wheat berries, and we're going to top it with the mushroom ragout and some greens. Oops, I got to grab those. Do you have any more of those cooked greens? No, I forgot to keep some apart. Well, we're going to pretend we have greens. And this is the kind of thing where you can have some cooked dishes made at the weekend. You can be a weekend cook and then come home every week. Grains will keep for 3 or 4 days in the refrigerator. They freeze really well as well. So you can compose these things pretty quickly if you've got stuff on hand. So we're going to start with quinoa. And then we will top it with this really delicious mushroom ragout. And I put in the recipe, you also would put some greens around. You really want it for the color as well. It's really pretty. We'll just put extra parsley, I think. And then a little cheese. If you wanted, if you didn't want the dairy, you could do some seasoned tofu. If you do eat animal products, a poached egg is really nice on this as well. But there are just lots of ways to go with the big bowl, and they're very good for families because people can put the things they like on them or not. And if you really want meat, you could always put some shredded chicken on the top too. It doesn't have to be vegetarian. I'm all for accommodating people. So we got some blanched mustard greens here too. So I'm going to go back to my frittata and see how that's doing. As you can see, it's setting up nicely. I'll just some of the other foundation recipes that you can use in different dishes are, I have a pepper ragout in the first chapter, and I teach you how to poach eggs. Then there's a whole chapter of bean recipes, and they can be mixed and matched and used in big bowls and tacos. I've kind of broken down the vocabulary. You know, if you eat meat and you say, what's for dinner, you can say chicken, and that's enough. Nobody kind of cares beyond that, but I always felt that there weren't enough one-word answers for what's for dinner if you're a vegetarian. So with this book, each chapter is a one-word answer to what's for dinner, or two, big bowls, it's two. But risotto, frittata, tacos, stir fry, couscous, what else do I have in there? Pies, savory pies. There's 12, but anyway, you'll see when you. So I'm hoping that with this there will now be a language for the vegetarian main dish. I think I'm going to move this and start on the actually, you could probably finish this over here. So with the mushroom ragout, we've got the first thing that you do, and this is what's going to give you a really wonderful broth, is you're going to soak dried porcinis or other dried mushrooms. I like porcinis the best because they have so much flavor, in boiling water to cover, and let them soak for about 30 minutes. And when they're done, you have this really nice porcini broth, which is also a great soup base. But that's what's going to provide the liquid for this really delicious ragu. And then we've got regular mushrooms, and we've got a mixture of, I think, maitakes, and what are these mushrooms? Brown alba. So, whatever you can find, whatever is available. Just a couple of tablespoons of olive oil will be plenty. Oh, let's do the shallots first. And again, what I'm doing today is very Mediterranean, so the seasonings I'm using are thyme and rosemary. And just soften those shallots. And always do your onions before you add your garlic, because garlic cooks really, really fast. And burnt garlic is not tasty. And if you find that your onion is browning too fast and you don't want it to, just add a little salt, and that'll bring out the liquid in the onion, and it'll stew rather than burn. So once your onions are soft, you're going to add your garlic. And again, you just want it to smell good. And then you're going to add your fresh mushrooms. And even though it looks like, how can I ever fit all of these mushrooms in the pan, they really cook down. So they'll start to sweat and cook down pretty quickly. But you don't want to salt the mushrooms until they sear a little bit and start to exude their own liquid. They have so much water in them, it'll be too watery. Ask me questions while these are cooking.
I think frittatas started so hot, but then you put them in the oven for a while.
Well, just to get the top, you can. There are in the book. I've got a whole bunch of baked frittata recipes as well, but you can do them either way. It's just that you need to run them under the broiler, because there's always for a multi-egg one, if it's just for two people, you can just do it all on top. But usually there's still a puddle of egg that you'll want to cook on the top. When I do baked frittatas, I usually mix the eggs with a little bit of yogurt or ricotta, and I get this really nice fluffy baked frittata. And in the book, there's also 2 egg omelets as well, which are so quick to cook. Everybody says, oh, vegetarian cooking takes so much time, but an omelet takes about a minute. So it's all a question of, having something to put in it on hand. And that could just be fresh herbs if you've got nothing else. Herbs or vegetables. So. You see how this is already losing a lot of volume. Eventually, we're going to add some wine to this, and it's going to, it'll deglaze all this nice stuff on the bottom of the pan. So at this point, once the mushrooms have begun to sweat a little bit, you can add some salt. And then they'll start to really sweat. Pardon me? No. If you don't eat onions, leave them out. It'll still be really good because mushrooms have so much flavor. Everything is adaptable. Now, normally these would be ready, and I'd have squeezed them dry, and it's really very important that you line your strainer with cheesecloth because sometimes they have sand in them, and then you rinse them and chop them, and they would go into this. But in the interest of time, and the other thing is, if you want the gravy to be really thick, you can add a little flour, but it's not absolutely necessary. If you're gluten-free, you don't have to. But that will thicken the gravy as it cooks.
If you're looking to make it dairy-free instead of adding milk in the recipes, do you recommend soy milk or almond milk?
Well, for the frittata, I would there's so little milk, you don't really have to add it at all. So wine and mushrooms love each other. They're just great. And I forgot to add the thyme and the rosemary, which I should have added with the mushrooms, but it doesn't matter.
Do you have a way of judging when all the alcohol has evaporated? Like if you're cooking?
If you see no liquid, then it has. And that's with the wine, you're going to cook it all off before you add the stock. It's really very simple. You know, all of these are ingredients you can find in the supermarket. And I mean, I would prefer to get my greens always in the farmer's market because they're just so lush and fresh, and I think the prices are better. A lot of people say it's more expensive to shop in the farmer's market, but I find actually that's not so much the case. So what you're waiting for here is for the wine and the juice from the mushrooms to cook down and really glaze the mushrooms. No, I would use a regular, don't use your most expensive bottle. And with this dish, like this ragout I used, what did I use? I think I used rosé, a dry rosé. You can use white, red, or rosé. Any of them work and are friendly with mushrooms. So. And so at this point, just add your broth and just let that cook down, and it'll take about 10 minutes, maybe 15. If you're doing a double batch, a little longer. But I think I did this. My column is 5 recipes every week, and always a theme. And one week I just made the ragout as one thing and just did 4 other recipes because I put it in a tart. I think I made a taco, probably a frittata, and maybe a risotto. It's really, if you were making a risotto, at this point you could start adding the rice and just cook the rice with the ragout, and it would be absolutely delicious. So at this point, if you can, turn the heat down. Let's see if I can. And let that just simmer slowly. So how's our frittata? Oh, great. So, we have something to. Okay. Why don't you do it, Chef? Okay. So, I'm just going to pretend this is a creme brulee and cook the top. Because it's just a little layer of egg that you're trying to cook. And in the broiler, as these did, it will brown and puff, and then it'll kind of go back down. See how that egg is. Working.
Why do you blow torch and not just flipping that?
Because I find it really hard to flip a great big omelet like this. But, you know, if you can, and then let it cool for a little bit in the pan, and then it'll just slide out. And then you can, these are great at room temperature. You can serve them hot. I would let it sit for a few minutes before cutting it, because it'll cut a little more neatly. But there you go. So shall we serve up some of this food? I'm going to put a little bit more of this in here.
Yeah, so if you guys want to come help yourself, we've got samples of the big bowl with the grains marketed, the quiche on the end, and some plates of knives for you.
And I'm just going to keep talking while you.
Yeah, somebody's got a question.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to keep talking about just the idea of cooking regularly and eating well, which I'm trying to make it easier for you all to do. So just with the idea of building blocks and templates, I think you can decide on the things you like, and then.
Can you maybe talk a little about proteins?
Yeah. Okay, so that one is a fairly low protein dish, but the grains are fairly high in protein. I do think that, you know, we get a lot of protein through the day with the different things that we eat, and I'm not a person who feels like you have to have a big hunk of protein in each meal for it to be a meal, as long as there's satisfying and filling food. So in this case, if you want the higher protein grain would be the quinoa, because that is a very high protein grain. And then you're complementing it with a little bit of cheese. The frittatas are really high in protein, because egg is like a perfect protein. I think of eggs as a really perfect food. It's nice.
I don't disagree, but a lot of people, eggs have a lot of cholesterol.
Well, actually, dietary cholesterol is not what makes you have high cholesterol. So the whole egg thing has been pretty well disproved by nutritional science. So that's a really nice thing. You know, that's a nice thing, because eggs are great, and whole egg omelets are so much better than egg white omelets. Yeah, serum cholesterol apparently doesn't come from dietary cholesterol. Do you all cook? Who cooks? Yeah? Good. A little bit? Well, I always say you only have to have a few things you like to cook to, to eat well and to cook for yourselves and your family and whatnot.
Can I ask a somewhat unrelated question?
Pardon me?
Can I ask a somewhat unrelated question?
Sure.
What is your favorite method for cooking beets? Do you
Beets?
do them or
In fact, they're one of the foundation building block recipes in the book. I roast them. And the way I do that is I scrub the beet, I don't peel it, I cut off the greens. Always get your beets with the greens attached because that's like a twofer. You have the greens to use in something like the frittata. And then I cut the greens off, leaving about 1/4 inch of stem, just so the beets don't bleed that much. And then I put them in a baking dish with about 1/4 to 1/2 inch of water in the dish. And that way they kind of steam a little bit while they roast. And then cover the dish tightly. I roast them at 425. And depending on the size, the small beets take about a 1/2 hour, medium 40, 45 minutes, and large 50 to 60. And then ideally I would take them out of the oven and just let them sit with the lid still on the baking dish. And then I keep them, and I don't peel them, and I find they keep better if I don't peel them until I'm ready to use them, or if I do, I'll toss them with a little vinaigrette and just have them in the fridge. But that's just a great thing to have on hand. And people who think they don't like beets when they've had them roasted change their minds. And if you like spicy, you can always add chilies to, this is really, this base ragu, sometimes I'll add some chipotle chilies to it and use it for tacos or enchiladas, Mexican food, or even as a side dish. They really lend themselves to that. Questions, more questions? How are we for time? We're good. 10 more minutes. And as far as different greens to use, chard and I guess we had mustard greens, did you say? Mustard greens are good, kale. Spinach is good, but it really cooks down. So you get a lot more bang for your buck if you use something like chard. It's very convenient to use the bagged spinach, but a lot of that is like these stringy little stems, so I really prefer to find bunch spinach in the market. And I think in the big bowl that has these mushrooms in the book, I think it calls for spinach, but chard will also work. Any green, really. And the other important thing about cooking, and especially cooking vegetarian food, is to taste your food and to season it. I am somebody who thinks salt is really important, and I use it. And even when I'm using it in conjunction, I use other seasonings too, but I think it brings everything into balance. So don't be afraid of salt unless your doctor tells you you can't have it. I think I got enough here. So this is good to go. If I wanted it, if I want the liquid thicker, I would have just used a little more flour in there. Or you can just reduce it. You can just cook it down more. Okay, so the broth is I soak the dried mushrooms, and it's an infusion. It's really a porcini broth, and that you can smell how aromatic it is. And that's just that makes a really great vegetarian soup base generally. If a recipe calls for a beef broth and you want to use something that isn't meat, I would suggest a mushroom broth always.
How long do you typically serve Coolhaus?
30 minutes, even 20, you get the broth. And I find the most aromatic is from when you use porcinis, which you can get these big containers at Surfa's. And for a recipe like this, I mean, for this particular recipe, I used about an ounce, which is about a cup of dried mushrooms.
I think you said this already. The way to avoid a soupy mess that I usually get with mushrooms is to...
Okay, so don't salt. First of all, have the heat really high when you add them so they sear, because then they'll get a lot of flavor right away. And then let them sweat before you add salt. I mean, if you're, like I did a double batch of this the other day, and there was a lot of liquid. So then just cook it longer, turn up the heat, cook it down, because it's hard to overcook the mushrooms once they're, but sear it first and add the salt after some of the water's already come out of the mushrooms. And then if you want to add a little flour to it too, that'll thicken it.
You had mentioned blanching the veggies like right when you buy them. Can you go over that again?
Yes, okay, so you get home from the market, you've got your bunch of chard, which is going to wilt like this. Take it off the stems, wash it, bring a pot of water to a boil. You can also steam it, and then salt the water, dunk it in the water until the leaves are soft, take it out, and then squeeze out all the water and just put it in the refrigerator. And that will, and I find that if you put it in a bowl and cover the bowl with a plate, rather than put it in a plastic bag, it keeps better in the fridge. It'll give it more time. You can also freeze it. And then you would want to really wrap it airtight in plastic, double wrap it, and then put it in a freezer bag. But this is just a great way to save time during the week, because if your greens are already ready, you could just do so much with them, not, even less complicated than these. I was working really hard a couple of weeks ago, and I had been cooking all day for a demo. I got home, I was hungry. I had some greens in the fridge. I took 2 pieces of bread and made a really great toasted cheese sandwich in the toaster oven with greens and Gruyere cheese. It was really good. So I always recommend having things prepped ahead if you can. Is that my get off the stage? Yes. That's my get off. Yeah.
I kind of like soft rice, but I know it's not as healthy as other things. The way to make the best low bowls we have.
Yeah, actually there is, and it's really a delicious thing. If you really love white rice, you have that, but then cook up some quinoa or some, sure, or some, that one doesn't have the actual dried mushrooms in it, like this one. Yeah, it smells good. Then cook up some whole grains that may have a little more going for them nutritionally, and then mix the two. And then you get, you kind of get a really nice variation in textures. One of the things I've got in the book is in the risotto chapter, you can't really make an actual risotto that's creamy with anything other than arborio rice, because they don't have the starch. The other grains don't have the starch that gets into the liquid that gives the texture that you want. So I'll use like 2/3 of a cup of arborio rice and make a risotto that's really creamy, but then I'll stir in cooked quinoa or another really hearty grain into that. So then you've got a lot of texture and nutrients going. So that's one way. Then like grains that are rice-like, maybe barley is, but nothing's quite, like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to, introduce more of the nutritious grains, then I would just mix some together, and it's pretty, and it really is appetizing to do that. And one thing you can do is you could let's say you cooked up this much quinoa, put it, and you wanted to just have some of it some of the time. So what I do is I put it in a freezer bag and flat. And then when I want some, I just break off a corner and throw it into thaw it in the microwave, throw it into a salad. Grains are really great in salads. So there's all kinds of ways to incorporate this kind of eating into your life without like feeling like you have to relearn everything. Just by cooking some of this food and keeping it and adding it to things. So thank you for coming. I am here to sign books as well, if you'd like.